They called 911 on my wife. 20 minutes later, she evicted their HOA president. The moving truck rumbled down Maple Hollow Lane, just as dusk settled over the perfect little suburb. Ethan Moore parked at the curb and smiled. Home, finally. His wife, Sarah, stepped out, brushing dust from her blazer. Home, she echoed softly, though the word felt fragile. Within minutes of unloading boxes, a golf cart rolled up. A woman in a white blouse and pearls stopped in front of their driveway, holding a clipboard like a badge. "Excuse me," she called sharply. "Who authorized your move-in?" Ethan blinked. "Authorized, we own this house." Her lips pursed. "I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president. No one moves in without my approval." Sarah gave a polite smile. "Your approval, that's not how property law works." Karen ignored her. "You're not on the occupancy form. You'll need to vacate until we verify your status." Ethan exhaled. "You're calling the cops, aren't you?" Karen already had her phone out. Rules are rules. 15 minutes later, police lights splashed across their driveway. Karen crossed her arms, triumphant. But when Officer Lewis stepped out, Sarah calmly opened a black folder. The officer skimmed it, nodded, and left without a word. Karen's smugness faltered. "What was that?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Documentation, Ms. Whitmore. You'll understand soon." The next morning, Ethan found a bright orange violation notice taped to the door. Unapproved occupancy. Fine, $500. Daily penalties apply. Sarah read it, amused. This woman really thinks she's queen of Maple Hollow. Ethan, less amused, said, "Maybe we should just keep our heads down." But Sarah had already started researching. She logged into the county database, pulling old property filings. "She's been charging illegal fees," she murmured. "And look at this, she filed the HOA charter under her personal name 10 years ago." That afternoon, Karen returned, clipboard ready. "Just letting you know, I'll be filing a lien if the fine isn't paid." Sarah looked her dead in the eye. "Perfect, put everything in writing." Karen smirked. "Glad we understand each other." Sarah's smile didn't waver. "Oh, we do. I'm just building my case." The first letter arrived on a Monday morning. A white envelope tucked neatly under their door with the HOA seal stamped in red like a warning label. Violation 1. Unauthorized occupant. Ethan read it twice, disbelief turning into a slow burn of anger. "Unauthorized occupant," he muttered. "She means you." Sarah looked up from her coffee, eyebrows raised. "So me, your wife, am unauthorized now." It would have been funny if not for how calculated it felt. By Wednesday, 3 more letters followed. Unauthorized curtains visible from the street. Mailbox shade non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics. Improper vehicle overnight. Each citation was signed in the same tidy cursive. Karen Miller, HOA president. Ethan started stacking them on the counter, a silent tower of spite. "She's obsessed," he said, voice low. Sarah only smirked. "She's predictable." But behind that calm exterior, Ethan could see the same tension building, the kind that made her fingers tap against her mug. Sarah had spent years working as a property attorney before switching to real estate development. Rules like these were her playground and her battlefield. That Friday evening, just as the sun dipped low and the cicadas began to sing, there came a soft knock on their door. Ethan opened it to find Tom Garcia, their elderly neighbor, standing with his weathered hat in hand. His eyes darted to the street before he spoke, as though worried someone might be listening. "Evenin', son," Tom began. "Didn't mean to intrude, but I saw those letters." Ethan sighed. "She's relentless." Tom gave a knowing nod. "Karen's been on her power trip for years. Last year she tried to evict my daughter for parking her car 3 inches over the sidewalk line. Said it was unsightly." Sarah crossed her arms. "That sounds about right." Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. But listen, there's something you ought to know. This land you're living on used to belong to the Moore family trust. Ethan froze mid-breath. My grandfather's trust. Yup, Tom said, a faint smile touching his lips. I've lived here 40 years. I remember when old Charles Moore, your granddad, sold off parcels to the developer, but rumor was he never transferred the mineral rights or the central tract. And guess where the HOA office was built? Ethan's pulse quickened. You're saying the HOA headquarters sits on my family's land? Tom nodded. Check the county plats, son. I think you'll find a surprise buried in those old deeds. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sharpening with that familiar spark, the one Ethan had learned to recognize as her litigation mode. Ethan, she said slowly, if that's true, Corinne's about to have a very bad month. Tom chuckled under his breath. Reckon she's had it common. After Tom left, Ethan and Sarah sat in silence for a long while. Outside, the street lamps flickered to life. Somewhere down the block, Corinne's motion sensor lights flared on, watching, always watching. Ethan looked at the growing stack of violation letters, then at Sarah. You thinking what I'm thinking? Sarah smiled, that calm, calculating smile that only meant one thing. Tomorrow, we dig up the plats, and by next week, we dig up her whole empire. The next morning, the HOA's petty warnings stopped being annoying. They became motivation. Because Ethan wasn't just fighting for peace anymore. He was about to find out the truth buried under every street, every rule, every smug smile Corinne ever gave. And this time, the land itself might be on his side. Saturday morning dawned warm and golden, the kind of morning that made the neighborhood look peaceful again, at least for a few moments. Birds fluttered across driveways, sprinklers hissed quietly, and for the first time in days, Ethan thought they might have a calm weekend. Sarah, wearing a sun hat and gardening gloves, stood outside trimming the front hedge, the same hedge that brushed the property line. The sound of clippers clicking in rhythm was almost therapeutic, until the hum of an electric motor broke the calm. Corinne Miller's golf cart appeared at the end of the street, her mirrored sunglasses catching the light like twin shards of ice. She rolled to a stop in front of their yard with a squeal of tires and the self-importance of a small-town tyrant. Unauthorized landscaping, she barked, already pulling out her clipboard. This is a final warning. Ethan, holding his coffee, exhaled through his nose. We're trimming our own hedge, Corinne. You know, maintaining the property you say we neglect. Corinne stepped closer, her mouth tightening. That hedge borders community property. You're trespassing. I'm calling 911. Ethan let out a short laugh. You're kidding, right? Over a hedge. But the look in her eyes wasn't humor, it was triumph. She actually dialed. Unbelievable, Ethan muttered. Sarah dropped her shears and straightened, brushing off her gloves. Let her. This might actually help us. Minutes later, the distant sound of sirens echoed down Maple Hollow Drive. The neighbors began peeking through blinds, half curious, half entertained, another morning episode of Corinne versus reality. The patrol car pulled up slowly, lights flashing but sirens off. The same officer from last week stepped out, a weary look on his face that spoke volumes. Ma'am, he said, walking up to Corinne, we've been here before. Corinne's posture stiffened. Yes, officer, and they continue to defy the HOA. They're trimming the hedge on community property. This is a violation of section. Ma'am, the officer interrupted gently but firmly, this isn't a police matter. Ethan crossed his arms, watching the absurdity unfold. Told you. Corinne jabbed a finger toward him. Don't smirk at me, you're not above the rules. Sarah stepped forward, her tone calm but cutting. Officer, I'd like this visit noted as harassment and misuse of emergency services. This is the second false report in as many weeks. Corinne blinked, caught off guard. The officer turned to Sarah, nodding. You can file that at the precinct. It'll be reviewed. Ethan noticed Corinne's hand tremble slightly around her phone. She hadn't expected pushback, especially not official pushback. "Ma'am," the officer continued, his patience thinning, 911 is for emergencies. Next time you could be charged with making a false report. These are civil issues, settle them through the proper channels. Corinne's jaw tightened, the red creeping up her neck. "I'll speak to my attorney," she muttered. "Good idea," Sarah said evenly. "We'll be doing the same." The officer gave a small nod to Ethan. "Sorry about this again, sir. Have a good morning." He climbed back into his cruiser and rolled away, shaking his head as the lights faded down the street. For a long moment the three of them stood there in silence, Ethan, Sarah, and Corinne, the air thick with tension. Then Corinne turned sharply, climbed into her golf cart, and sped off with a screech, the clipboard rattling in her lap. Ethan looked at Sarah and let out a slow breath. "She's losing it." Sarah smiled faintly. "No, she's cornered." She picked up her shears and went back to trimming, calm as ever. "Now," she said without looking up, "we file that complaint and we check the county records. By next week, Corinne's going to wish she'd never made that call." Ethan smiled to himself, realizing that what started as petty harassment was about to turn into a full-blown reckoning, one backed by law, history, and the truth about who really owned Maple Hollow. The rumble of the patrol car had barely faded when Sarah turned on her heel and walked back inside. Ethan followed her with his eyes, coffee still in hand, wondering if the day could get any stranger. Inside he heard drawers opening, papers shifting, the crisp sound of purpose. "Sarah," he called out. Her voice floated from the study, calm but charged. "I'm done playing defense." When she emerged, the change was startling. The gardening gloves and sun hat were gone, replaced with a tailored navy suit and low heels. Her hair was tied back with precise confidence. In one hand she held a slim leather briefcase, in the other, a stack of neatly bound folders. Ethan blinked, going somewhere. She smiled, that razor-edged smile that always meant something was about to shift. To the HOA meeting. He raised an eyebrow. "Now, after she just called the cops on us." Sarah simply slipped on her sunglasses, "especially now." And with that she was gone. The minutes crawled. Ethan stood at the window, watching Corinne's house down the street, half expecting another scene. But the cul-de-sac stayed eerily quiet, no golf cart, no shouting, just the sound of sprinklers and the hum of distant traffic. Then, exactly 20 minutes later, a black county vehicle turned onto Maple Hollow Drive. Two uniformed marshals stepped out, followed closely by Sarah. Ethan stepped out onto the porch just as Corinne, dressed in her floral gardening outfit, froze mid-spray beside her rose bushes. The hose drooped in her hand. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore," Sarah said smoothly, walking up the sidewalk with the confidence of a woman who just changed the rules of the game. Corinne blinked, eyes darting between the badges on the marshals' chests and the legal folder in Sarah's hand. "WH, what's going on here?" Sarah flipped open the top document. "This, Ms. Whitmore, is a notice of pending injunction against the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association for unlawful governance, misappropriation of funds, and operation on improperly titled land." Corinne's face drained of color. "You can't." "Oh, I can," Sarah interrupted, her tone sharp but polite. She handed over the first folder, then pulled a second from her case. "And this one's addressed to you personally." Corinne took it reluctantly, her fingers trembling. Sarah continued, "You've been collecting HOA dues from residents on property parcels that, according to the county plat records, fall under the Moore Family Trust. That means you've been unlawfully levying fees and enforcing restrictions on land you have no legal claim over." Corinne's mouth opened, but no words came out. One of the marshals stepped forward, his voice official and detached. "Ma'am, you are hereby notified that the county is reviewing your HOA's charter and all enforcement actions are suspended pending investigation. The other marshal nodded, confirming, "And for the record, Ms. Whitmore, you've been served." The sound of the phrase seemed to echo through the still air. Karen looked around, realizing several neighbors had stepped out of their homes, pretending to check their mail or sweep porches but watching every second unfold. Her hand clutched the papers tightly, knuckles pale. Sarah turned slightly, her tone softening just enough to make it sting. "You really should have checked the property deeds before sending those violation letters." Karen stammered, You tricked me." "No," Sarah said, stepping back toward Ethan's driveway. "You tricked yourself. You built your little kingdom on someone else's land." The marshals exchanged glances, then headed back to their vehicle. Sarah turned toward Ethan, who stood on the porch, arms crossed, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "You just served the HOA president?" he asked as she joined him. Sarah gave a small shrug. "Technically, the county did. I just filed the paperwork." Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "You did all that in 20 minutes. 20 minutes and 3 phone calls," she corrected, eyes twinkling. "Turns out, Karen's golf cart isn't the only thing that runs fast around here." Down the street, Karen stood frozen in her yard, papers clutched to her chest, the weight of her collapsing empire settling around her. Ethan slipped an arm around Sarah's shoulder. "So, what happens next?" Sarah looked down the street, the faintest smile curving her lips. "Next," she said, "we let the law do what Karen never could, enforce the rules fairly." And as the marshal's car disappeared beyond the corner, the first crack appeared in the HOA's fortress of control, a small fracture that, before long, would bring the whole structure crashing down. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen blinds, casting long gold stripes across the dining table, but the warmth did little to soften the tension that hung in the air. Every inch of the table was buried under papers, old blueprints, manila folders, and rolled-up survey maps that smelled faintly of dust and time. Sarah stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a loose knot. She looked less like a homeowner and more like a strategist before battle. Ethan, still in his t-shirt and jeans, sipped coffee as he scanned the mess of maps. "These can't be real," he muttered, tracing one of the faded lines. "Look at this, the clubhouse, the lakefront park, even part of Karen's house. They all sit on the wrong parcel." Sarah smiled, her eyes gleaming with focus. "Oh, it's real. That's what makes it so beautiful." She picked up a yellowed sheet marked Moore Family Trust, Original Survey, 1968. The ink was faded, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Charles D. Moore. "My grandfather signed this," Ethan whispered. He felt a rush of something between pride and disbelief. Sarah nodded. "Exactly. Your grandfather deeded most of the trust property to the developer, but not all of it. There's a legal clause here." She flipped through another folder, stating that any transfer of land to future associations must include a joint consent from all Moore family descendants. Ethan frowned, "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said, tapping the document with a pen, "that the HOA never had full authorization to use this section of land. They were squatting on it, legally speaking, the entire time." He stared at her. "You're saying Karen and her precious HOA built half their empire on land they don't own?" Sarah's grin widened. "Worse, they've been collecting dues, enforcing rules, and issuing fines on property they don't even control. That's trespass, unjust enrichment, and fraudulent governance." Ethan leaned back, laughing softly. "So, all those violation letters she sent, technically, she was breaking the law while accusing us of it." "Exactly." Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And thanks to that clause, the Moore Family Trust, which now includes you, holds the right to revoke access or demand retroactive compensation." He blinked, absorbing it all. "So, we could actually evict them." Sarah smiled, slow, deliberate. "Not just them, the entire HOA." By noon, the dining room looked like a war room. Sarah had color-coded every document, cross-referenced county plat records with scanned deeds, and pinned printouts of property lines to the wall. Ethan's laptop displayed satellite images from Google Earth, each red box marking encroached zones. "You see this," Sarah said, circling the map with a pen. "The walking trail behind Karen's house cuts right through parcel 23A Moore Trust land." "And the clubhouse?" Ethan asked. "Built partially over lot 19C, also trust property." "And the HOA office?" Sarah smirked. "That one's the crown jewel, entirely on your grandfather's parcel. The very one Karen claimed was community land." Ethan sat down heavily, staring at the web of evidence. "I can't believe it. For years, she's bullied people with fines, citations, and threats, all while standing on stolen ground." Sarah rested a hand on his shoulder. "Bullies like her always build their empires on sand. They just never expect anyone to dig deep enough to notice." Later that afternoon, Sarah made a few calls, first to the county clerk's office, then to a surveyor who owed her a favor from her property law days. The conversation was brief but decisive. When she hung up, she looked triumphant. "The county's sending over certified copies of the original plats," she said. "Once those arrive, we'll have undisputed proof." Ethan grinned. "And then?" "Then," she said, pulling a fresh folder from her bag, "we serve a notice of revocation of land use rights. It'll freeze all HOA operations pending a legal audit. Karen won't be able to issue a single fine, collect dues, or even hold a meeting without violating state law." Ethan let out a low whistle. "You're terrifying when you're like this." "Efficient," she corrected, smirking, "not terrifying." That evening the sky turned soft orange, and the street was quiet, too quiet. The neighbors had caught wind of something. Word traveled fast in Maple Hollow. Karen's blinds were drawn tight, but Ethan noticed her golf cart parked crooked in her driveway, as if she'd rushed home in a hurry. He joined Sarah outside on the porch. She was flipping through another document, muttering legal citations under her breath. "You think she knows what's coming?" Ethan asked. Sarah didn't look up. "Not yet, but by tomorrow she will." He chuckled. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" She finally looked up, her eyes softening. "I'm enjoying seeing justice align with paperwork. It doesn't happen often." They both laughed quietly, but beneath it was the same shared understanding. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about the dozens of residents she'd harassed, the elderly couples she'd fined into submission, the families who'd moved away because they couldn't stand the tyranny disguised as community standards. For once, Sarah wasn't defending herself. She was defending everyone. The next morning, the county courier arrived with a sealed envelope stamped Official Records Division. Inside were certified copies of the plats, proof beyond dispute. Sarah spread them across the table once again. The lines matched perfectly with her research. She highlighted the encroached zones in bright red ink. "There it is," she said, tapping the HOA office lot. "The smoking gun." Ethan leaned over her shoulder. "So what's step one?" "Step one," Sarah said, sliding a document toward him, "is signing this affidavit as a descendant of Charles Moore, acknowledging your status as co-beneficiary of the Moore Family Trust." He took the pen, hesitated. "Once I sign this, what happens?" "Step two," she said, "is sending these to the county registrar and the HOA board simultaneously. Once the revocation is filed, the county will post an official notice on the clubhouse door." "And Karen?" Ethan asked, unable to hide the grin creeping across his face. "She'll get hers delivered personally." By noon, the printer hummed nonstop. Sarah prepared legal packets in triplicate, each sealed, stamped, and tagged with exhibits. Ethan watched her work in awe. "I forgot how good you are at this," he said. She didn't look up. "I didn't." By early afternoon, she was ready. Together, they drove to the small county record's office downtown. The clerk, a kind woman named Rita, remembered Sarah from her attorney days. "Still fighting the good fight?" Rita asked with a smile as she reviewed the files. Sarah smirked. "Always." Rita flipped through the maps, her eyes widening. "You're telling me the HOA been operating on misfiled land deeds all these years? Oh, that's going to get messy." Sarah nodded. "Messy is fine, legal is better." Rita stamped the documents with a heavy received seal and filed them in the county database. "All official now," she said. "The trust's claim is reinstated." Ethan exhaled, feeling something like relief mixed with vindication. Back at Maple Hollow, things began to unravel almost immediately. The next day, the HOA's maintenance crew arrived at the lakefront park, only to find a large orange sign posted by county order. "Notice of property review, land under title dispute. All HOA operations suspended pending investigation." By evening, rumors were flying faster than gossip could keep up. Some said the HOA was being dissolved. Others claimed the county was seizing property. Karen, however, went silent. Her usual morning patrols ceased. Her golf cart didn't move an inch. Ethan watched from the porch as neighbors whispered on sidewalks, eyes darting toward Karen's house. The balance of power had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. That night, Ethan and Sarah sat outside under the porch light, reviewing the next steps. "She'll retaliate," Ethan said quietly. "She always does." Sarah nodded. "I'm counting on it. The more she fights, the deeper she'll dig herself in. Everything documented now. Every call, every letter, every misuse of authority." He smiled faintly. "You really built this case like a chess game, didn't you?" She looked at him over her glasses. Karen started a war with paperwork. She just didn't realize she picked a lawyer's wife. They both laughed softly, but the laughter carried something sharp beneath it. Because they knew the storm wasn't over, it was only gathering strength. 3 days later, Sarah received an email from the county legal office confirming what she'd hoped for. Subject: preliminary title review completed, more trust validated. The message was short and formal, but its meaning was explosive. The trust's claim over several parcels was legally binding and enforceable. Sarah forwarded it to Ethan with a single line. She built her kingdom on borrowed ground. That evening, she drafted one final document, a formal notice of eviction and cease operations order addressed directly to Maple Hollow Homeowners Association, Atten, President Karen Whitmore. The letter was concise and devastating. Effective immediately, all operations, dues collection, and enforcement activities within the Moore Trust parcels are to cease. Any further occupation, alteration, or financial activity shall be considered unlawful trespass and subject to prosecution. Ethan read it twice, then looked up. "So this is it?" Sarah nodded. "This is the beginning of the end." The next morning, Ethan delivered the envelope himself. He placed it neatly on Karen's front step. She opened the door seconds later, still in her robe, and froze when she saw him standing there. "Good morning," Ethan said pleasantly. "Trust mail." She stared at the envelope as if it were ticking. "You think you can scare me?" He smiled. "Not at all, just making sure you're informed. You like rules, remember." He turned and walked away, hearing the paper rip open behind him. For the first time since moving into Maple Hollow, he didn't feel like the outsider being watched. He felt like the land itself was breathing with him, reclaiming what was rightfully his family. That night, thunder rolled over the neighborhood, wind rattling the windows. Sarah and Ethan sat together at the table, the same one now cleared of maps, only a single deed lying in the center. Sarah ran her hand over the faded ink, tracing the signature one last time. "Your grandfather built this land," she said softly. "Now it's your turn to protect it." Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on the paper. And tomorrow she'll finally understand what that means. Outside, lightning flickered, a brief flash illuminating the Maple Hollow sign at the neighborhood entrance. By morning, that sign would stand for something entirely different. Because now the deed had spoken, and the clause had teeth. The Maple Hollow Community Center had never been this crowded. Folding chairs lined the back wall, and a few residents stood in the doorway, craning their necks to see what was going on. The word had spread like wildfire. The HOA president was in trouble. Karen Whitmore stood at the front of the room, clutching the edges of the podium like it might anchor her to sanity. Her once perfect posture was gone. Her shoulders slumped, her voice trembled, and even her signature string of pearls looked out of place against the sweat forming at her collar. This meeting, she began, clearing her throat, is to address some recent rumors being spread about the association's legality. Let me assure everyone, the HOA operates entirely within the scope of county law and— Cut the script, Karen, a voice interrupted. It was Tom Garcia, one of the longest-standing board members. His arms were crossed, his jaw set. People aren't here for your PR lines. They want answers. A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread across the crowd. Karen blinked rapidly. Tom, please. No, he said sharply. You owe us the truth. Did you, or did you not, forge parcel filings when Maple Hollow annexed the lakefront property? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Sarah stood quietly near the back, dressed in the same navy suit from the day she served the injunction. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the unraveling play out like a long-awaited storm finally breaking. Karen tried to recover, her voice pitched high. That paperwork was handled by my late husband. Tom slammed a folder down on the table. I was there, Karen. I watched him sign those papers. You told him the Moors wouldn't notice. You said the land was unused and that no one would care if it was listed under the HOA. Gasps filled the room. Even the board's treasurer, usually silent and sycophantic, looked pale. Sarah finally stepped forward. Her calm presence drew the room's attention like gravity. She placed a single manila folder on the table in front of Karen. Inside, she said softly, you'll find the county survey records, the original deed to the Moore Family Trust, and the legal description showing every inch of land the HOA built on without title. Karen swallowed hard, staring at the folder like it contained a live bomb. Sarah continued, her tone steady and clear. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to end this the right way. Dissolve the HOA, refund the illegal dues, and vacate the parcel boundaries, or we proceed to court. And if we do, I'll request not only restitution but criminal investigation into fraudulent land appropriation. A heavy silence followed. One man in the second row raised his hand timidly. What does that mean for us homeowners? Sarah turned to face him. It means your homes are safe. You won't lose property. If the HOA is dissolved properly, ownership reverts to individual parcels as they were before the illegal annexation. You'll have freedom again. No more arbitrary fines, no more surveillance, no more harassment for non-compliant paint colors. A murmur of hope rippled through the crowd. Karen's face twisted. You think you can just waltz in here and dismantle everything I built, she spat. This neighborhood was chaos before the HOA. I brought order, structure, class. Without me, this place will fall apart. Tom let out a bitter laugh. You didn't bring order, Karen. You brought fear. You fined people for leaving their trash cans out an hour too long. You banned kids from chalking sidewalks. You called the police on a woman trimming her hedge. Karen's eyes darted to Sarah. This is your fault, you and your husband. You've poisoned everyone against me. Sarah didn't flinch. You did that yourself. A tense beat passed. Karen's mouth opened, closed again. Her eyes darted toward the back of the room where a few residents were recording on their phones. She stammered, You can't post this online. These are private proceedings. Tom folded his arms. Actually, no. This is a public meeting of a registered homeowners association. Transparency laws apply. Karen's confidence drained visibly. The room was no longer hers. Another board member, Denise Lang, cleared her throat nervously. Sarah, if the HOA is dissolved, what happens to the community funds? Sarah turned to her, maintaining that lawyer's poise that made her both feared and respected. By law, those funds are to be held in escrow and redistributed to homeowners proportionally. The county will supervise the process to prevent misuse. Tom added grimly, which means no more secret maintenance fees ending up in Karen's new SUV. The crowd broke into murmurs again, some angry, some incredulous, most finally realizing how deep the corruption went. Karen's hands trembled on the podium. You people are ungrateful. I've protected this neighborhood. I've dedicated years of my life to controlling it, Ethan interjected, not protecting it. The simple statement landed like a punch. Karen turned toward him, face red. You don't know what it's like to manage people who don't care about standards. Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes were steel. My grandfather built this land with his hands. He planted the trees your rules say are too close to the sidewalk. You don't understand community, Karen. You only understand control. A few homeowners clapped quietly, then a few more. The sound grew, soft but steady, like the cracking of ice before it breaks. Karen's composure finally shattered. Fine, she screamed. If you want to destroy everything, go ahead. Let the weeds take over. Let the neighborhood rot. Her voice echoed off the walls, sharp and desperate. Sarah stood still for a long moment, then spoke softly. Karen, no one's destroying anything. We're rebuilding what was stolen. The words hit deeper than any threat could have. Karen's hands fell from the podium. Her eyes darted around the room, at the residents she'd ruled over for years, at the neighbors who once feared her, now looking at her with quiet disgust or pity. She turned back to the board, her voice barely a whisper. I won't resign. Tom looked at the others, then we'll vote. One by one, the hands went up, 5 members in total. 4 raised their hands for dissolution. Only Karen kept hers down. Tom nodded. Motion carried. The Maple Hollow Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved pending county verification. The room erupted, not in chaos but in a strange, liberating silence. A weight lifted. Karen slumped into a chair, staring blankly at the floor. Her empire had fallen in under 15 minutes. Sarah collected her papers, gave a polite nod to Tom, and turned to leave with Ethan. As they reached the door, Karen's shaky voice called out, You think this is over? You'll regret this, Sarah. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Sarah paused, half turning. On the contrary, she said quietly, it's finally over. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors stood in small groups, talking, some even smiling for the first time in months. Ethan looked at Sarah. You handled that like a pro. She shrugged lightly. It's easier when the truth's on your side. But as they walked toward their home, both knew Karen wouldn't let it end so easily. Behind those hollow eyes, something still simmered. Resentment, fear, maybe even vengeance. The HOA was gone, but Karen Whitmore was not done. And Sarah, with her sharp mind and iron calm, was ready for whatever came next. The morning air was unusually still, that kind of silence that makes every sound echo louder than it should. A pair of county sheriff's vehicles rolled down Maple Hollow's Main Street, their presence drawing curtains aside and neighbors to their porches. Karen Whitmore stood rigidly at the edge of her driveway, gripping her robe closed with one hand and her phone with the other. Her hair, once immaculately styled, hung unevenly, and her eyes darted nervously between the 2 uniformed officers stepping out of the car. Sarah walked toward her in measured steps, a manila envelope in her hand. She wore no suit today, just jeans and a simple blazer, but there was a calm authority in her face that made the scene feel almost ceremonial. "Ms. Whitmore," Sarah began, her voice even and unhurried, "I'm here on behalf of the county court." Corinne's lips trembled. "What is this? Why are there police at my house again?" Before Sarah could answer, one of the deputies, a tall man with a solemn face, stepped forward and read from a clipboard. By order of the County Civil Court, case number 24C1589, the defendant, Corinne Whitmore, is required to vacate and surrender all HOA-administered property located within parcels 11A through 15C, effective immediately. Compliance is required within 72 hours of receipt. Sarah extended the envelope. This contains the official eviction notice, along with an inventory of structures and assets on the affected land. Corinne blinked rapidly, her breath hitching. "Eviction? That's ridiculous. I own that office. I'm the HOA president." Sarah's gaze was calm, almost pitying. "Not anymore. The HOA was dissolved last week. The county recognized the Moore family trust ownership of those parcels yesterday morning. Legally, that office, the maintenance shed, and even the lakeside storage facility are on land that doesn't belong to you." Corinne's face drained of color. "This is a setup. She turned toward her neighbors who had begun gathering on the sidewalks. "You all are witnesses. They can't do this to me. I built this community." The deputy spoke again, his tone courteous but firm. "Ma'am, we're not here to debate ownership. We're here to serve a court order. You have 72 hours to vacate. After that, you'll be trespassing." Ethan stepped up beside Sarah, his presence steady and silent. He wasn't gloating, though he had every reason to. He simply folded his arms and said, "We've arranged for a third-party appraiser to document any HOA property so nothing personal of yours gets mixed up. You'll get copies of everything." Corinne's hands shook. "This is harassment. You can't evict a president. You can't remove me from my own office." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Corinne, there's no office anymore. The HOA charter was nullified. The bank accounts are frozen pending audit. The locks will be changed on Monday by order of the county." For a long moment, Corinne said nothing. Her gaze flicked from Sarah to Ethan, then to the deputies, then to the neighbors watching from porches and driveways. People who once feared her, people who once jumped when she sent violation letters or fines, now looked at her with something between fascination and quiet satisfaction. Her composure cracked. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. "You think this makes you heroes? You're tearing this neighborhood apart." Sarah's voice was low but firm. "No, we're setting it free." The words hung in the air, soft but final. Corinne's face twisted with rage. She snatched the envelope from Sarah's hand, crumpling it. "This isn't over. I'll appeal this. I'll call my lawyer." Ethan's tone was steady. "You had one. He withdrew 2 days ago after the county investigation opened." Her lips parted, but no words came out. The deputies exchanged a look. "Ma'am," one said carefully, "we'll be back Monday morning to confirm compliance. If you need time to remove personal items, now's your chance to do so peacefully." Corinne turned away abruptly, stumbling up her porch steps. She slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing down the street. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the soft chatter of neighbors whispering from across the road. Sarah exhaled, a slow, measured breath. "That went better than I expected." Ethan gave a small, tired laugh. "You call that better?" "She didn't throw anything this time," Sarah said dryly. They both managed a faint smile before turning to head back toward their house. The sheriff's car pulled away slowly, leaving behind a trail of stunned silence. As they walked, a few neighbors nodded or gave tentative smiles. One elderly man called out, "About time someone stood up to her." Sarah nodded politely, but her expression remained thoughtful. "This isn't just about her," she murmured. "It's about undoing what she made everyone believe, that fear equals order. Ethan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You've done that already." "Not yet," she said softly. "Not until people start living here without looking over their shoulders." Later that evening, inside the now empty HOA office at the edge of the lake, a county locksmith changed the final set of locks. The walls were lined with neatly labeled binders. Violations, 2022, architectural complaints, 2023, special assessments, legal pending. Sarah and Tom stood side by side, overseeing the process. Tom looked weary but relieved. Hard to believe all this paper built her little empire. Sarah traced a hand along one of the shelves. It wasn't the paper, it was the silence. Everyone let her believe she had power. Tom nodded slowly. "Not anymore." As they left, Sarah locked the door and handed the new keys to the deputy standing by the cruiser. "Deliver these to the county clerk, please. The more trust will handle future access." The deputy nodded, understood. When she and Tom walked back toward their cars, they saw Corinne's house across the cul-de-sac, its lights flickering as shadows moved behind the curtains. A figure stood in the window, watching. Tom frowned. "You think she'll actually leave?" Sarah didn't look back. She doesn't have a choice. But deep down, she knew Corinne well enough to sense that compliance wouldn't come quietly. The woman who once ran Maple Hollow like a private kingdom wouldn't accept defeat without scheming for revenge. Sunday night. Rain rolled in after dusk. Thunder echoed across the lake and the wind howled through the empty streets. Inside her darkened house, Corinne sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by open folders, coffee-stained papers, and a half-empty bottle of wine. She replayed the moment over and over: Sarah's calm voice, Ethan's quiet confidence, the pity in her neighbor's eyes. She had built this place. Every brick, every trimmed hedge, every fence post bore her touch, and now it was all slipping away. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Corinne, I heard about the injunction. There might be a way to delay enforcement if you can produce evidence the more trust boundaries were misfiled. Want to talk?" She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. A new glimmer of hope flickered, or maybe denial. She typed a reply. "Who is this?" No response came. Outside, the storm raged harder. Corinne stood, walked to her window, and looked out toward the lake. In the distance, the old office building sat dark and locked, the symbol of her fall. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. A woman stripped of power, teetering between rage and despair. But beneath that reflection, something sharper burned, a plan forming. Back at the Moores' home, Sarah sat by the window, sipping tea, unaware of the message Corinne had received. 3 days, Ethan said quietly, reading the court papers again. 72 hours, you think she'll comply? Sarah set her cup down. She'll fight it, but she's out of weapons. Ethan smiled faintly. You sound like you've done this before. She met his eyes. Once, a developer tried to steal a client's land by redrawing a boundary map. He lost everything when we caught him. People like Corinne, they never learn until someone makes them stop. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her calm face for a moment. The storm outside was fierce, but inside there was peace, the kind that comes after standing up to years of intimidation. Sarah didn't know it yet, but the real storm, Corinne's last desperate attempt to reclaim power, hadn't even begun. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, sterile, controlled, the air humming with the low murmur of voices and the shuffle of legal pads. Yet beneath that order, tension pulsed like static. The room was packed. Every seat behind the plaintiff's bench was filled with residents from Maple Hollow, some whispering nervously, others sitting with arms crossed, faces tight with expectation. The HOA board occupied the opposite side, stiff-backed and visibly uneasy. At the center sat Corinne Whitmore, pale and rigid, her usual air of superiority reduced to brittle silence. Sarah and Ethan sat quietly near the back, hands intertwined beneath the bench. They hadn't come for spectacle, they came for closure. The bailiff stepped forward. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Rebecca Havorson entered, a woman known in the county for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for pettiness disguised as law. She took her seat and adjusted her glasses, scanning the courtroom. "This is case number 24C1589, she began. Moore Family Trust versus Maple Hollow Homeowners Association and Corinne Whitmore, HOA President. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience before falling back into silence. Judge Havorson flipped through the case documents. "I've reviewed the filings, land plats, and testimony provided by both sides." Her gaze lifted to Corinne. "Mrs. Whitmore, your association was found to have extended its jurisdiction into parcels not included in your registered deed of establishment. Furthermore, HOA funds were collected from residents occupying land outside your governing area. Do you dispute these findings?" Corinne's attorney, a gray-haired man who looked as though he regretted every moment of his involvement, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the association believed, in good faith, that its authority extended across those parcels based on community use and—" "Good faith," the judge interrupted sharply, "does not override recorded property boundaries, nor does it permit the collection of mandatory fees on land legally owned by another trust." Corinne's mouth tightened. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "You may not. You are here to listen to the ruling, not to relitigate what this court has already determined." Corinne sank back, face flushed with humiliation. Sarah watched from the back, her heart steady but heavy. This wasn't triumph, it was accountability. Years of arrogance, threats, and weaponized rules condensed into a few cold paragraphs of legal truth. Judge Havorson continued reading from the bench. "This court finds that the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association has operated beyond lawful jurisdiction and collected funds under false representation. The association is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. All remaining HOA assets and accounts shall be placed in county receivership pending an independent audit." Gasps filled the courtroom. Several residents clapped their hands over their mouths, stunned. Corinne's attorney's shoulders sagged, his pen falling from his hand. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the defendant, Ms. Whitmore, is prohibited from serving in any fiduciary or managerial capacity in future homeowners, organizations within county limits for a period of 5 years. Personal restitution claims from residents may proceed through small claims court." Corinne's jaw dropped. "You can't ban me from—" The gavel cracked, echoing like thunder. "Sit down, Ms. Whitmore," the judge said curtly. "You have done enough damage with your mouth. You will now listen to the law you so freely abused." Corinne froze, trembling as the bailiff's gaze locked onto her. Slowly, she sank into her chair. When the gavel struck again, final this time, the courtroom erupted in a mix of whispers, sighs, and quiet disbelief. Sarah stood, gathering her papers, and Ethan followed. Neither spoke. The sound of Corinne arguing with her attorney trailed behind them, her voice shrill and cracking. Outside, the autumn air was crisp. Reporters waited on the courthouse steps, microphones poised. One of them, a local news anchor Sarah vaguely recognized, called out, "Mrs. Moore, can you tell us how you uncovered the land deed discrepancy?" Sarah gave a polite smile. "We just read what everyone else ignored. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight." "Do you feel vindicated?" another reporter asked. Sarah paused, glancing at Ethan. "No, I feel relieved. The law finally caught up with the lies." Ethan nodded beside her, then stepped forward as another question came. "Mr. Moore, what happens to Maple Hollow now that the HOA gone?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. "It'll survive. It always was a community, not a corporation." The crowd of cameras clicked and flashed as they descended the courthouse steps. Several neighbors approached them, people who, months ago, barely made eye contact, now coming forward with gratitude and emotion. "Thank you," said one woman clutching her purse, eyes wet. "You don't know what it was like living in fear of her letters, those fines." An older man nodded. "She fined me $400 for painting my shutters the wrong shade of gray." Ethan offered a small, sympathetic grin. "You don't owe anyone a dime anymore." Another man reached for Ethan's hand. "You freed us." The words made him pause. He looked over at Sarah, who was talking softly to a group of residents, her calm presence dissolving years of tension with every measured word. "Freed us," he repeated under his breath. For the first time in months, the words didn't sound like rebellion. They sounded like peace. That evening, the news spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, Maple Hollow HOA dissolved by court trended on the local news site. A video of the gavel strike circulated on social media, shared by relieved homeowners across the county. By sunset, the HOA office door was sealed with a county lock notice. The once bustling headquarters, where Karen had held her infamous meetings of scolding and fines, now sat abandoned, a relic of arrogance. Ethan stood by the lake, watching the last light fade across the water. The reflection of the old clubhouse shimmered, fractured, as ripples passed through. Sarah joined him, hands in her coat pockets. "Feels strange," she said softly. "So much noise for so long and now silence." He nodded, peaceful though. They watched a pair of kids ride their bikes along the sidewalk, the same spot where Corinne once posted "No play after 6 p.m." signs. Their laughter cut through the still air, pure and light. Sarah smiled faintly. "That's what it's supposed to sound like." Ethan turned toward her. "What happens now?" She shrugged, the hint of amusement in her eyes. "The county will manage the trust land. We'll help residents set up a neighborhood cooperative, something transparent, something real." He laughed softly. "No more unauthorized curtains." She nudged him with her elbow. "Not unless you start hanging neon ones." Meanwhile, across town, in a dimly lit diner off Route 27, Corinne sat alone at a corner booth. The sound of forks and low chatter filled the air, but she heard none of it. A half-empty cup of coffee sat in front of her, cold. Her reflection in the window was tired, unfamiliar. The courtroom humiliation still burned in her chest, the judge's words replaying on a cruel loop. "Dissolved band, fraudulent." She clenched her jaw. "They think they've won," she muttered under her breath, "but this isn't over." A figure slid into the opposite booth, a man in a charcoal suit, his face partly shadowed. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly. "I represent several former HOA developers. They're very interested in what happened today." Corinne's eyes narrowed. "Interested how?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say, if the Moores plan to claim Maple Hollow's assets, they might find a few new legal challenges waiting." For a moment she hesitated, then leaned forward. "I'm listening." Back at Maple Hollow, lights glowed softly from every home. For the first time in years, there were no patrols, no surveillance complaints, no fines. Just laughter and music and neighbors talking freely under porch lights. Ethan locked the front door and turned to Sarah, who was thumbing through a folder on the kitchen counter. The final deed transfer, officially recognizing the Moore family trust boundaries. "It's done," she said quietly. "Legally permanently done." Ethan slipped his arm around her waist. "You did it, Sarah." She looked up at him. "We did it." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of wet leaves and peace. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like tiny stars, and for the first time since they'd moved in, Maple Hollow felt like home. The nightmare was over. Or at least it seemed that way. Because somewhere beyond the lake, in a diner that never closed, Corinne Whitmore was already plotting her return. A week later, the community gathered as workers removed the metal HOA sign. In its place, Ethan unveiled a simple wooden board. "Welcome to Maple Hollow, respect over rules." Children ran across lawns again. Tom Garcia waved from his porch. Ethan turned to Sarah. "You planned this from day one, didn't you?" She smiled. "Not exactly, but I knew bullies only win until someone reads the fine print." They walked up the driveway hand in hand. No flashing lights, no fines, no fear. Just freedom. And behind them, the sound of Corinne's golf cart engine faded into silence forever.